So now that I've explained the basics of how to create and open and read and write text to and from a text file, let's look at a program that actually does something with that text. So you'll find this in the source code archive for step 9, and it's 02_file stats. In this program, I'm going to read one line at a time from a text file and count the number of lines that are read. So you can see this is how I've done that. It's in the line count function. And I pass this function the name of a text file that contains some text, and it displays the number of lines. If I pass the name of an empty file, it should tell me that the file contains 0 lines. And if I pass the name of a file that doesn't exist, it should tell me that the file can't be opened. So just to quickly go through this code, here I've declared the integer numLines, and I've assigned it 0, which is the default value. Then I've got the char array, which is the line I'm going to read at each stage through the loop. And I've initialized that with max strlen. This is the constant up here that defines the maximum number of characters. And now I create a file pointer fp when I open the file in read mode. Then I test that the open function has succeeded. If it doesn't succeed, then fp will be 0 or null, and I just exit the code. I don't attempt to run any code to read lines. But if it succeeds, well, then I read one line at a time using fgets. I read the line for the size of the line, the number of characters that have been defined, and there's my file pointer here. And that will then terminate, the while loop terminates when 0 or null is returned, and at each turn through the while loop I just add 1 to the numLines counter. Now, in order for this to succeed, I need some files to work with. You'll need to make sure that the files are in the directory containing some text files. In CodeLight, by default, that creates a debug directory under the main project directory, and I've made sure that the text files that I'm using are in the debug directory. So here's what I've got. I've got one text file, empty.txt, and indeed it is empty, there's nothing in there. The file exists, but it has no contents. I've got another one, sonnet.txt, and that contains a Shakespeare sonnet with 14 lines. And if I go back to my code, you can see that I attempt to count the lines in 3 files. First of all, in sonnet.txt, that's the file name constant here, then an empty file name, which is empty.txt, and finally invalid file name. Well, that's a file that doesn't exist. So let me run it and see the results. And here are the results. So, as I'm expecting, sonnet.txt contains 14 lines of text. That's the number of lines that that file does contain. Empty.txt contains 0 lines of text. That's the file that, in fact, was empty. It has nothing in it. And finally, the file name that doesn't exist, that displays file not here.txt cannot be opened. And that is because the test up here, if fp not equals 0, well, that evaluates to 0 because the file can't be found. And so the else clause down here executes, and it says that the file can't be opened. So that's a very simple first look at one way of reading text from a text file and analysing the contents by counting the number of lines it contains.